I want to mention is that this Gospel of John, this John's Gospel, states very clearly that the only way to the Father is through Jesus. And we use this Gospel a lot in funerals in the church. And I'll admit it, I'll even admit it on video for the rest of time, as long as video lasts, that I often stop the reading before we get to the part where it feels like we exclude everyone. I do it historically because I know John's community was nursing a hurt about being tossed out of worshiping with their Jewish siblings. And it's a simple line that has caused a lot of anti-Semitic, anti-Muslim, anything that doesn't really fit with our narrative sentiment that has been used to hurt, kill, and create a lot of mayhem in the world. So if you listen to that gospel and you've turned off your ears, please turn them back on, because there are words of comfort here. And I just wanted to put some context there. So here's the beginning of my sermon. When my mother died, I was 23 years old. And I knew she was sick. And either my father had been not so forthcoming with the information of how sick she was, or perhaps as a 23-year-old, I just listened to what I wanted to hear. So I was shocked when my father called and told me that I needed to get home. The time was short, and my mother was dying. So I got an airline ticket, and my sister Margaret picked me up at my house with the kids in the van. It was this huge old van that she could put all of the car seats in. And it was a hot, steamy, end of July kind of summer in Minneapolis. And we started off to the airport. And understandably, I was upset by all of it. I mean, who wouldn't be? But, in that 23-year-old, I'm in the midst of grief. I couldn't see past the end of my own nose. I didn't see my sister suffering. I was just impatient that we needed to get to the airport. Because I was worried. Would I know what to do? Would I know how to sit with the dying? Would I freak out? Would I be able to say goodbye in a proper way? What should I say? What should I tell her? So as we were going to the airport, there was a problem with 35W. A major freeway had buckled right under the 36th Avenue Bridge. It was impassable. So all 4 lanes of the freeway had to narrowly channel off to this one exit, go up and over, and then back down onto the freeway. It was a mess. And it was a hot mess, too, because when a car starts to move that slowly, it starts to overheat, so you have to turn the air conditioning off. It was hot. This reading from John's Gospel is Jesus saying goodbye. And the disciples are having all the same kind of feelings. They don't know what to say. They don't know what to do, and they are freaking out. They're freaking out like I was freaking out in that sweaty van all those years ago. Peter, a mere paragraph before that we didn't hear this morning, had been told that he was going to deny Christ 3 times. And really all the rest of them, all the rest of the followers had been told, this is not going to be your best moment. You are not going to come out of this well. But Jesus starts with, do not let your hearts be troubled. I wish I had heard that in the van. And perhaps, like the words of my father who art in Calgary, I would not have heard them. It's difficult to hear words of comfort when you're in a panic. I'm going to say it again. It is difficult to hear words of comfort when you are in a panic. I was sure I was going to miss my plane. I was going to miss my chance to see my mother. Didn't these rows of cars understand I had to get through? I remember the fear and the anxiety and the lack of control in that big blue van all those years ago. I hadn't thought of that story in years because I had moved away from Minneapolis, moved away from ever going through that exit. But what's happening now in this world, this time of brokenness, of chaos, of hot messedness, it all came tumbling back to me. There's so much in this world we have no control over, and maybe we notice it a little bit more fully now. Things that are still in play that have been in play for a long, long time, but we don't have much to be distracted by it. I thought of 4. I have 4 bullet points in my sermon. 1, our country is still divided about those who now want to open up everything and those who want it to stay closed. And that draws around a certain amount of political lines. We again still have people with lots of guns and military type gear, those flak jackets protesting not only state capitals but outside of governor's mansions. And yet again, yet another black man has been lynched. This modern day lynching of Ahmaud Arbery in Brunswick, Georgia. He was going for a run. And he was hunted down and murdered. And if you don't understand why I'm using the word lynching in this, call me. I'd love to have that conversation with you. My fourth point is, of course, and always this inequity that we see. The people who can stay home and work from home and stay safe from the virus other than a few trips to the grocery store once a month. Some who financially can stay home. And again, we are seeing the glaring economic realities of fault lines, mostly drawn about money and race. And Jesus again says, do not let your hearts be troubled. But these things are so much closer to our hearts right now. This stay-in-place order, this global pandemic have given us time to contemplate things and wonder what we can do. What should I do to change the world? And on top of it all, things are just happening to folks, and they understand that level of heartache, because it can come into our homes so very easily, come into our lives so very easily. And death feels really close this week. The death of Bao and Rick, the death and hospitalization of parents, of parishioners, of people who gather around this altar. We all know somebody who is ill. And I still feel comforted by the words of don't let your heart be troubled. Don't let your heart be troubled so that it freezes you up, so that you're so panicked you can't do something to be present to the world, to be present to the brokenness. That's how I hear don't let our hearts be troubled. It's not this la, don't worry about anything thing. We need to hear the words of comfort, of not letting our hearts be troubled. In a world where the upset of the world is near and near and near and near, and we cannot hide from it. Brokenness, for some of us, is very close. Long after my mother's death, after I had returned from Calgary, Alberta, Canada, I began to live in a house right off the exit that I desperately waited to get through all those years ago, trying to get home to sit with my mother, to wait for death. Every time I got off that exit, I thought to myself, well, did I do it well? Not really. Did I know how to sit with the dying? I learned. My mother was my first teacher. I want to say equivocally, I did not freak out. I said goodbye as best I could. Did I say the right things? I think some things I said really well, and other things not so much. I did get an opportunity to tell her that I loved her. Getting off that exit every single day, I felt the pangs of it. I could not hide from any of it, any more than any of us can hide from what's going on in the world right now, where the disciples could hide from Jesus saying goodbye. I had to ask myself these questions every single day I drove through that exit, and I had to make peace with it. I am a great pretender. I could have pretended that my mother was still alive and well in Calgary and only deal with the grief when I had to. And I know it's different now. We will have to find a new way through this time, because for me, I was able to show up physically for my mom. And we can't. We can't do that for each other. In this new way, God is calling for us a new way to be of comfort to one another, to show up emotionally for each other. It's what the world needs. It's what the world has always needed. Jesus knew that he was leaving. This is part of the farewell discourse. And he tried to set an emotional table for his friends. That's what we're trying to do, to set an emotional table for each other to deal with the brokenness of this world. We are asked to deal with grief and death. Jesus, as a teacher, invited his followers to do so. And we're called to work on our grief and work on some acceptance. I would not, nor could I hide from this grief. And nor can any of the rest of us. The grief of my mother was something I had to deal with. Physically, I was reminded, so I dealt with it emotionally. Physically, we're reminded that we're separate, and so we deal with it. Lindsay Jodry wrote this week, and I'm going to end with it. Our nativity may be gone. Grief and death may be more and more evident these days, but perhaps there is a salvation to be found. While we can't save ourselves, may we be reminded that God, who saves, has been unleashed in the world. The birth of Christ in this world unleashed love incarnate. We all get to follow that. Love will conquer death. Love will find a way. There is true hope, even when our hearts are troubled. Amen. Our affirmation is on the bottom of page 7. Let's say that together.
We believe in God, the Creator, from whom everyone in heaven and on earth has life and being. We believe in God, the Son, who has been raised